Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 1 wide receiver rankings going into the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about my top 36 wide receivers going into Week 1, as I give you guys my perspective, my analysis, and my breakdown as to why I think these players should be ranked accordingly. Now, again, remember, rankings are always subject to change. The video that I put out yesterday, my running back rankings, I've adjusted it just a tad bit from yesterday, but don't forget, Sunday morning, from 8 a.m. PST to 10 a.m. PST, I will be live streaming. Updated rankings for the top 36 will be there. But for those of you who are trying to get flex rankings, the only place to get that is my Patreon, patreon.com/AndrewKiorkof. You go down in the description of the video, find that, support me there to get flex rankings and a lot other content, private Discord, all that kind of stuff. Outside of that, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. I think from the last time I saw you guys, we broke 18K and then we just broke 19K subs. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you very much for the support. Outside of that, timestamps are down in the description of the video as well, where you can find that. Outside of that, I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Smash the like button and let's get into it, shall we? Now, before we begin, like I mentioned yesterday with the running back position, we got to start our studs in Week 1. Let's start the players that we drafted to be our number one wide receivers, our number one guys that are going to start on a weekly basis. Let's not get too cute with our lineups this week. I understand there's a couple players dealing with injury. We can go ahead and evaluate that as the week progresses. Again, we're still only on Tuesday here. So again, Wednesday, Thursday, the Friday injury report is going to give us a pretty good indication of where players will currently stand going into Week 1. But again, let's play our studs. And again, a lot of these players, especially the guys in the top 24, these are guys that you are going to automatically start. So do not really double think or second think yourself when you're approaching this. I know a lot of you perhaps play in a smaller league where you have 6 to 8 teams and you have all-star lineups. Play your studs regardless. All right, here we go. Starting off with my number one, the stud of all stud muffins going into the 2020 fantasy football season is Michael Thomas at the wide receiver position. Besides the fact that he was absolutely incredible, legendary last season, he starts off 2020 with one of the best matchups. I mean, he literally plays against the defense that gave up the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers last season per week in a half PPR scoring format. That's correct. Everything that we talk about today will be in a half PPR scoring format. We're meeting everyone in the middle, whether it's full or standard. We meet them in the middle with half. Regardless, Michael Thomas plays against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary, who in my opinion has not addressed the cornerback position very much this offseason, or perhaps I think regardless, even if they addressed it and brought in somebody, Michael Thomas has been so successful against them that they really just cannot stop him. Last season, in the 2 contests that he played against them, he totaled for 18 receptions, 296 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. Again, when they get Alvin Kamara signed in a couple days, this offense will be flowing and they will be unstoppable. And once again, we'll find ourselves with Michael Thomas, though he's running slants every play, feasting in this offense and continuing to be an incredible fantasy prospect. You're starting him regardless. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves number 2, Davante Adams. He is the number 1 wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers offense. And what does that mean? That means he's guaranteed to have an incredible season because he is the one pulling attention and or targets from Aaron Rodgers. And though Aaron Rodgers does not have any other, weapons around him in terms of the passing game as a wide receiver, Allen Lazard, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, these are not top tier players. So Davante Adams is going to be funnel targeted as per usual. We know he's a touchdown fiend. He's performed well against the Minnesota Vikings in the past couple seasons. Again, last season, if I'm not mistaken, in the 2 contests he played against them, he totaled 20 total receptions and 222 total receiving yards. And also, even when Davante Adams returned from his turf toe injury last season, in which he missed a 4-game stint, he returned and was incredible. He was averaging 16 fantasy points per game at the end of the last regular season. And in the playoffs against the Seattle Seahawks and against the San Francisco 49ers was amazing. Davante Adams should not be slept upon. You're starting him. He's a beast. Moving on. Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin won the jackpot this offseason. Besides the fact that they improved the quarterback position, they improved the quarterback position to a guy that wants to funnel target the slot position. Tom Brady specifically threw the ball to Julian Edelman over 150 times last season, and he loves to throw the ball to his slot receivers, and I expect Bruce Arians to once again utilize his slot position. Going back to last season or last offseason, Bruce Arians said that Chris Godwin is the Larry Fitzgerald of this offense, and that's how they want to use him. They want to continue to feed him the rock. They play against the defense that was giving up the 5th most points to opposing wide receivers last season, and that's exactly what they did when they played against Chris Godwin. In the games that he played against the New Orleans Saints last season, He had 10 receptions for 199 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Again, this is going to be a shootout. Both of these defenses, the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, are great against stopping the run. Two of the best in the league. So where does the running game go? Right into the crapper. And then what do we have? We have a shootout of wide receivers at a top tier talent going back and forth against cornerbacks that are just not up to par with the talent at wide receiver in the NFC South. I'm excited for this matchup, back and forth shootout. Speaking of another NFC South wide receiver, we have ourselves Julio Jones as my number 4 going into this week, playing against the Seattle Seahawks. He played against Seattle Seahawks last offseason, and I think regardless, this upcoming season, I don't think Griffin, their number 1 corner, is going to be able to stop Julio Jones. He wasn't able to do it last season, and last season, Julio Jones went for 10 receptions and 152 receiving yards with Matt Schaub at quarterback. That's right. So Julio Jones should be great. Again, he's another one of these studs that you're always going to start. We always want to see touchdown upside from Julio Jones, but if we're not going to find it, it's perfectly fine because he will eventually get himself in the passing game over 100 receiving yards. He's one of these consistent monsters. You're starting him regardless, and I'm excited for the upcoming matchup between Seattle and the Falcons, so that should be fun. Moving on. Tyreek Hill is my number 5 wide receiver going into this game against Houston. Now, again, in the last 2 contests that they've played against Houston's secondary has not been fantastic. Again, they're probably in the bottom tier of secondaries going into this upcoming year. I mean, I know they've made a couple of adjustments here, and then what Bradley Roby comes in. They've made adjustments at their cornerback position, and that's perfectly fine, but you cannot cover speed like Tyreek Hill. I mean, to be honest, there's a thing that Tyreek Hill has that no other receiver has in the NFL. And sure, some of them, like Mecole Hardman or Marquise Brown or DeSean Jackson, they show glimpses of it or have done it in the past. But Tyreek Hill could literally score on 2 catches, 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, and literally have the number 1 wide receiver ranked by the end of the week and only play 2 snaps. He's so capable of having these burst plays and being just unstoppable in said offense that, again, you have to start him. There is a volatility factor to it, but regardless, you drafted him knowing that full well that he's capable of showing up and putting up a 6-point week, but at the same time can come and show up with a 36-point week. We'll see how it goes this upcoming Thursday against Houston Texans. Regardless, Tyreek Hill is a monster. Moving on. DeAndre Hopkins is the last of our top 6 wide receivers here. DeAndre Hopkins gets to go against the San Francisco 49ers coverage, which graded out as the best coverage team last season. Now, at this current moment in time, I went ahead and I looked at what exactly Richard Sherman, who will probably be covering DeAndre Hopkins, what he was capable of doing last season. And I found myself seeing that Richard Sherman wasn't able to really lock down any wide receivers. Wide receivers were still getting a plenty of yards at the back end of the season. They really couldn't stop many people. I mean, even in the Super Bowl, sure, Sammy Watkins and or Tyreek Hill had themselves great games. Davante Adams torched him in the NFC Championship game. We go to the week 17 of the season. Robert Woods had himself a great week. And again, their coverage, as good as they were, they give up yards. And I know for a fact that Kyler Murray wants to use his new toy, and they're gonna send the ball in the direction of DeAndre Hopkins a lot. And I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be able to take advantage of good old Richard Sherman over there in San Francisco. He's my number 6 going into this week. Moving on to number 7, we have ourselves Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay goes on against the Bears this upcoming week. Last season against the Bears, Kenny Golladay was a monster. I mean, he played 1 game with Matthew Stafford against the Bears and 1 game, I think, with Jeff Blau at quarterback against the Bears. Regardless, he had 7 receptions for 215 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns against that defense last year. Again, Kenny Golladay is another one of these wide receivers that is only going to catch the ball 6 times max in a singular game. And if he does any more, then that's incredible. But typically, he's only going to catch the ball 6 times on like 10 targets. Because he's a big body receiver that's going to make big plays, deep ball action. That is what you want to see from Kenny Golladay. And I expect him to go ahead and be successful this upcoming week. We have ourselves Matthew Stafford, the gunslinger, under center. I expect this to be a pretty exciting game. Again, the secondary for the Detroit Lions specifically is not that good. They got rid of Darius Slay. So if, in fact, Allen Robinson on the other side of the field starts scoring and moving the ball down the field pretty quickly, Matthew Stafford's going to have to answer. He's going to use his number 1 weapon. I think Kenny Golladay finds himself in a very advantageous position this upcoming week. Moving on to our number 8 wide receiver, we have ourselves JuJu Smith-Schuster. I think similar to a Kenny Golladay, the fact that he gets his starting quarterback back, when you get Ben Roethlisberger under center, you have yourselves such an improvement at quarterback. in comparison to what JuJu was dealing with last year, that this offense is going to function completely differently. They're going to be able to move the ball. It's not going to be so many 3 and outs. And I think with everyone healthy, and I think the amount of targets that I've seen JuJu Smith-Schuster have in a singular week, the fact that he goes against this New York Giants defense, it's probably going to be James Bradbury on him. Not too worried about that. I think there's a very good chance that JuJu could finish a game with 14, 15 targets because he's done that before. And I think that kind of opportunity will definitely lead to his eventual success. So I think this upcoming week against a very soft defense, JuJu Smith-Schuster will end up succeeding. He's my number 8. Maybe a little high for some of you, but I really have a lot of confidence in JuJu this upcoming year. Moving on to our number 9, we have ourselves Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson, again, plays against Kenny Golladay and the Detroit Lions this upcoming weekend. Now, the thing is, the Detroit Lions got rid of Darius Slay, and losing Darius Slay as an offensive threat is definitely going to make a huge difference. That being said, Mitchell Trubisky will be under center, and a lot of people are scared. Man, is Mitchell Trubisky going to be enough? Are we going to get enough value out of Allen Robinson? And the answer is absolutely. Last season, in the 2 games that the Detroit Lions played against the Chicago Bears, Mitchell Trubisky threw for 6 total touchdowns, 3 in each game against the Detroit Lions defense. I think that without a doubt in my mind, Allen Robinson's going to feast. I think Mitchell Trubisky might have himself a pretty good game, a low-key good game with Anthony Miller, Tariq Cohen. Regardless of their running game, they're going to be able to pass the ball because they've done it in the past against that defense and been very successful. Allen Robinson should have himself a pretty good week. Moving on to number 10, we have ourselves Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, again, another one of these wide receivers that, even though he got injured last year, is going to redeem himself this upcoming season in 2020. He is the lone wide receiver here. Without Stefon Diggs, I see it as Justin Jefferson, Irv Smith, Kyle Rudolph, even Dalvin Cook in the passing game, they're going to be utilized. But Adam Thielen is the number 1 far and away. He's going to have so many targets go in his direction. I could easily see him breaking double-digit targets, even or maybe potentially receptions this upcoming week against the Green Bay Packers defense. Again, Green Bay, they have a decent secondary. And over the past couple of years have been trying to improve that as much as they possibly can. Regardless, Adam Thielen has torched them over the last couple of years. You go back to the 2018 stats, he was all over that secondary and dominating. So I think he's going to get back to form, fully healthy now, not dealing with no hamstring injuries. He should be good to go. All right, moving on. We have ourselves our number 11 overall wide receiver. Let's go ahead and get his name here. DJ Moore. DJ Moore gets to play against the Las Vegas Raiders. I made a mistake there again. It's already computed in my brain as as Oakland. I'm trying to, as you can see, reprogram my brain. But regardless, DJ Moore gets to play against, in my opinion, one of the softer secondaries. I know Trayvon Mullen's probably going to be the number 1 cornerback there, locking down or trying to lock down DJ Moore. But I'm not too concerned about that. I think it's a matter of what are we going to see from a guy like Teddy Bridgewater. Is Teddy Bridgewater going to be a passive quarterback, or is he going to let the ball rip and give DJ Moore the opportunity in the deep ball game to have himself some extra success on top of the fact that he will be able to dominate this secondary, in my opinion? I think DJ Moore is set to have himself a pretty good year, and I think he's going to start that off in week 1. He's my number 11 going into the Las Vegas Raiders versus Carolina Panthers matchup. Moving on, we have ourselves Mike Evans. All right, so Mike Evans is a little tricky here because last year there was a couple games in which Mike Evans completely disappeared when playing against the New Orleans Saints. I mean, he had a game in which he literally caught 0 passes for 0 yards against them. Now, I don't know if that's the coverage. I don't know if that's just the game plan, but ultimately, I think Mike Evans is going to find himself some success this week. Tom Brady wants to throw the ball to a bigger wide receiver. And every quarterback wants to throw a ball to a bigger wide receiver. They can go up and get passes that cornerbacks will never be able to get, right? Usually you want to throw a ball where only the wide receiver can get it. But when you're 6'4" and you can, you have a 36-inch vertical, you'll figure it out. So Mike Evans, I'm sure, is going to find some success. They're going to get their top 2 wide receivers ready to go. It's going to be a shootout, and I expect Mike Evans, like Chris Godwin, to step up. Even though he struggled in the past against this New Orleans Saints secondary and their number 1 coverage, I think he'll be perfectly fine in week 1. He's one of your studs. You got to play him. Moving on, we have ourselves number 13, DJ Chark. Now, a lot of people look at the Jacksonville Jaguars organization and think to themselves, perhaps they're not trying to win games this year, but I can guarantee you Gardner Minshew is going to try to win as many games as possible, and he's going to come out and feed the ball to DJ Chark as he's done in the past. DJ Chark last season with Nick Foles under center had a pretty incredible game against the Indianapolis Colts in which he totaled for 8 receptions, 104 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. The second game that they played against the Indianapolis Colts, DJ Chark did get injured, unfortunately, and was kind of limited to an extent. But this upcoming season, with Gardner Minshew under center, I expect DJ Chark to be funnel targeted. I expect him to have himself more and more opportunity if he stays healthy. This is going to be another one of these breakout years for DJ Chark. He already kind of showed us glimpses last season. I think he's going to take that next step this year, and it starts in week 1 against Indianapolis. Again, their secondary, their cornerbacks, I'm not too convinced that they can stop a guy like DJ Chark. Moving on. My number 14 is Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp is, again, besides the fact that he's going to be a red zone threat, he's going to be, besides Kenny Golladay, he was the only other wide receiver last year to score 10-plus touchdowns. He's going to be Jared Goff's safety blanket in said offense. So as of this moment in time, I think Cooper Kupp's a very safe play. He is a wide receiver 1, 2 on that fringe. That's why I have him at the number 14 spot here, because he could finish the game with 6 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown, exactly like he did last year against the Dallas Cowboys. He's very capable of just putting up a mediocre performance like that, and you're perfectly fine because you're going to get yourself, 13 fantasy points. I'm good to go there. So that's why he sits at this number 14 range. There's always the possibility of wide receivers like Cooper Kupp, DJ Chark, or any of the guys that I mentioned below to be upside players that have that big game and step into that top 12 conversation. But as of this moment in time, I'm sitting comfortable with Mr. Cooper Kupp at number 14. Moving on. Bobby Trees, Bob Woods, Robert Woods, all the names that this international man of mystery is currently holding. Robert Woods is a very interesting prospect because last season, for majority of the year, he was not the Robert Woods we know and we love. But Robert Woods eventually at the last end of the season, from weeks 13 through 17, kind of kicked it into a different gear. He was getting about 10, 11 targets a game. He was averaging 15 plus fantasy points per game. And I can hope that once again this upcoming season, the Rams offense is going to function in that matter, and they're going to feed Robert Woods the ball. They're going to feed Cooper Kupp the ball, and they're going to both be a successful part of this offense. Now, last season when they played against the Dallas Cowboys, the Rams could not accomplish anything offensively. They were really just lackluster, to say the very least. So hopefully this year they watched the film, they've adjusted accordingly, and Robert Woods, which will probably go against a decent cornerback in Awuzie over there, should be just fine. I think again he's one of these middling wide receiver 2s that has upside, and that's why he sits at number 15. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves Keenan Allen at number 16. Due to the fact that Mike Williams will probably miss week 1 or potentially even more time, I expect Tyrod Taylor to funnel target Keenan Allen. Again, you continue to see me say funnel target because I think these top end wide receivers all also have the most opportunity amongst the wide receivers we're going to name today. If you are getting the most attention, you're going to get the most opportunity and get the most ability to score fantasy points on a weekly basis. That in itself will pay dividends. And I think that's why Keenan Allen this week sits at number 16, though many people might have him lower. I think Keenan Allen is the only wide receiver option that Tyrod Taylor is going to look for. In the past couple of years, Tyrod Taylor's career, we've seen him funnel target Sammy Watkins, maybe even Jarvis Landry with the Cleveland Browns in 2018. I think Keenan Allen, besides him, maybe Austin Eckler or Hunter Henry are capable of catching the ball, but I think Keenan Allen has a lot of opportunity coming in his direction this week against Cincinnati. He should be fantastic. Our number 17 wide receiver this week is Tyler Lockett. Playing against the Atlanta Falcons is nothing uncommon for this team. They played against Atlanta last year. Tyler Lockett had 6 targets, 6 receptions, 100 receiving yards. That in itself, a great stat line. A middling wide receiver with upside, of course, because Tyler Lockett always has the opportunity to score touchdowns. In the last 2 years has 18 total touchdowns within this offense. We know how much Russell Wilson succeeds down on the goal line and in the red zone in terms of the passing game. I expect Tyler Lockett to be a deep threat, have the upside of being an even better wide receiver, but also has that safe floor because he's going to continue to get targets outside of, DK Metcalf. It's going in the direction of Tyler Lockett. He should be fantastic against a secondary who, in my opinion, is one of the worst in the National Football League. So I expect them to take advantage of that. Moving on, we have ourselves Michael Gallup at number 18. Now, Michael Gallup shows himself on today's list before Amari Cooper because Amari Cooper has been dealing with an injury over the last couple of days. So we'll talk about Amari Cooper once we get to him in the rankings. He is on the rankings, but as of right now, Michael Gallup kind of seems like the play because if in fact Amari Cooper is going to play, the attention is going to go in his direction. And Michael Gallup, as the number 2 wide receiver, on the opposite side of the field, is probably going to be able to flourish in said offense. I think what he accomplished last season, the consistency he showed, in the last game of the season in 2019, he had 3 receiving touchdowns. Dak Prescott loves to target Michael Gallup. They've gained the chemistry, and I think they're going to continue to utilize that. And I think Michael Gallup is in a pretty interesting position, especially if Jalen Ramsey is on the other side of the field guarding Amari Cooper. So I think Michael Gallup has himself a pretty good week here. Moving on. Terry McLaurin is my number 19 wide receiver, and easily Terry McLaurin could be a top 12 wide receiver in this week. Easily. It's not even close. I mean, what he did against Philadelphia last year was nothing short of incredible. I mean, in both games, had 5 receptions, had over 125 yards receiving in both games, and had a receiving touchdown in both games. Fantastic statistics. 20 bombs against both times against Philadelphia Eagles. That in itself, fantastic. But as the Washington football team goes into this matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, Darius Slay is the newest number 1 cornerback of the Eagles. And that in itself is a very difficult prospect. I mean, when I went and looked at what Terry McLaurin was capable of doing against Darius Slay last season when they played against each other, Terry McLaurin had like 12 targets, 5 receptions for, 50, 60, 70 yards. Nothing too important. I mean, it was just average numbers. But when he's typically gone against this Philadelphia secondary, who is, absolutely terrible, and thank goodness they've gotten him, a pretty good cornerback this offseason. I think Terry McLaurin will try to eventually, the way I see it, this Washington team needs to get him open. They need to get him away from Darius Slay. So how do you do that? You move him around the formation. You put him in the slot. You move him outside. You just move him around the formation as much as possible to keep him away from Darius Slay to be able to take advantage of easier matchups. I'm hoping they go ahead and do that because I really do think his upside is there. And the safe floor of obviously being the number 1 wide receiver in this offense is definitely going to take hold as well. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves Calvin Ridley at the number 20 spot. Again, as you can see, I already have 2 Atlanta Falcons and 1 Seattle Seahawks wide receiver on today's list in the top 20. Why is that? Because I think this is going to be a shootout of a matchup. I think both teams are going to succeed in the passing game. Sure, they both have great running backs, and they're going to utilize the game on the ground. But I think this is going to be one of the higher scoring matchups of Week 1. Both offenses just continuing to light each other up, and I expect Calvin Ridley, who's scored 16 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, to be able to come back this year and have himself a pretty good start to the year. Hopefully, with Julio Jones pulling number 1 coverage, can find himself open or in easier situations in terms of coverage and find some success here. Moving on to our next wide receiver, like I was mentioning, this matchup between the Seattle Seahawks and the Atlanta Falcons, in my opinion, is going to be a shootout. So where does that leave us? DK Metcalf finding himself in a pretty advantageous position. Again, DK Metcalf finished the year last year with a pretty good overall, resume for going into year 2. He had the most end zone targets amongst all wide receivers last year. He's a deep ball threat that they want to continually use. And the reason why Tyler Lockett is going to be in such a great position is because DK Metcalf is going to be on the outside stretching the field. And if and when he does, if and when he uses his 4.3 speed, one of these times he's going to break a couple runs, he's going to break a couple routes and find himself in the end zone eventually. Last year when they played against the Seattle Seahawks, he scored twice. Sure, his yard counts weren't there, but they definitely want to feed him the ball. And that's what they're going to continue to do. That's what they've been working on this entire offseason. Moving on. Another wide receiver that DK Metcalf is, very familiar with, his former college teammate A.J. Brown, playing against the Denver Broncos this week. A.J. Brown, again, is the number 1 wide receiver of the Tennessee Titans. I think Ryan Tannehill is going to shove the ball down his throat as much as possible. But, looking at his target counts from last year, they weren't incredible, right? Of the wide receivers I've mentioned before, a lot of these other guys get a lot of targets per game in comparison to A.J. Brown because that offense is a very run-heavy approach. Hopefully this upcoming season, Ryan Tannehill, with more confidence, more experience with A.J. Brown, wants to go ahead and get him more involved in the passing game. That's my hope, ultimately, that they're going to get him more involved. This upcoming week's matchup against Denver, though it's not the easiest, I think A.J. Brown is, a capable wide receiver and very capable of being a top 24 guy, again, with touchdown upside. He's going to probably be faced up against A.J. Boye. A.J. Boye was a former cornerback of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last time, A.J. Brown went against them, week 12 of last year, had himself over 100 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Beat up on A.J. Boye a little bit there. But again, I think this upcoming week, it's going to mainly depend on how comfortable Ryan Tannehill is going to be able to sit in the pocket comparatively to that pass rush coming at him, and can he have enough time to feed the ball to A.J. Brown? I think he'll be able to get it done. I think A.J. Brown will be perfectly fine. Our next wide receiver on hand is Odell Beckham Jr. at number 23. So OBJ though, you guys have seen me put him in my tier list at a very low level. You can go back to August. I thought that Odell Beckham Jr. this upcoming year is going to be one of the guys that has a redemption season, along with JuJu Smith-Schuster. But OBJ, the reason why I think he could potentially finish as a top 23 wide receiver this upcoming week is mainly because of how this offense is being constructed by Kevin Stefanski. And I keep saying his name because he's the new head coach of the Cleveland Browns and the former offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings. And what they did with the Minnesota Vikings is they utilized the running game. They pounded the ball down defenders' throats, which, the Cleveland Browns are more than capable of doing with what they've built over there. And then they go ahead and they hit teams with the play action. And with Odell Beckham, his deep ball threat, the ability to be able to separate from defenders, I expect him, sure, to be double covered by Marlon Humphreys, maybe Marcus Peters, and the safety over the top. But I still think that Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be put in situations in one-on-one coverage. They're going to force it to where play action. They're going to give him the best opportunity. And hopefully he steps up to the occasion this week and ends up scoring. Again, he's my number 23. Moving on. Number 24, speaking of the Vikings, speaking of deep ball passing, the guy that I think Odell Beckham, the role that he's going to play is Stefon Diggs' role. But Stefon Diggs is no longer in Minnesota. He no longer has Kevin Stefanski. He's ended up with the Buffalo Bills this offseason and with Josh Allen. And what we saw Josh Allen do with John Brown, their number one wide receiver of last year, was a top 24 wide receiver. They fed him with the deep ball as much as they possibly could. And Stefon Diggs is a far more superior wide receiver than John Brown is. And you go ahead and you implement him into this offense with another year of experience for Josh Allen, probably an increased level of accuracy. We have ourselves a very advantageous matchup against the New York Jets secondary, which in my opinion is one of the worst in the National Football League. So we'll find ourselves with Stefon Diggs potentially having himself a pretty good week here in week 1, my number 24. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves Will Fuller. Now, prior to recording this video, Brandon Cooks did not practice today. So where does that kind of leave us? That leaves me in a worried situation with Brandon Cooks, where if he's already dealing with an injury in week 1, he's probably not going to play. If he missed on Tuesday, Thursday's the game, he's probably going to miss. So where does that kind of leave us? Will Fuller being the number 1 wide receiver of the Houston Texans. And that's not a problem because last season, Will Fuller did, perform against the Kansas City Chiefs. Though he didn't get the job completely done because DeAndre Hopkins was on the field, I think Will Fuller is a very capable wide receiver. We all know the stats. When he is starting with Deshaun Watson under center, they're averaging about 13 points per game together. They have been great as a dynamic duo. But Will Fuller's health has always been the question. Now, as he steps up into this wide receiver 1 role, can he sustain it? I don't know. But this upcoming week, he's in a very advantageous position. Last season, when he played against the Kansas City Chiefs in the regular season, he dropped 3 touchdowns in the single game. It's retweeted on my Twitter. I'm not even kidding. The Twitter's down in the description. You can go find it. There's a video from last year against the Chiefs where he dropped 3 touchdowns during the regular season. In the playoffs, he had 5 catches for 89 yards against this defense. He has a lot of upside. He's going to have wide receiver 1 targets and opportunity. And I think Will Fuller has the potential of stepping up and producing this upcoming week. And that's why he sits at number 25. Kind of risky, but our number 26 wide receiver today is Courtland Sutton. Now, Courtland Sutton, in my opinion, his chemistry or his productivity with Drew Lock in the 2019 season just wasn't there. Now, though they've had an entire offseason to learn, to get more comfortable with one another, to find pace, to gain more experience, and obviously Drew Lock learned the playbook a little bit more, maybe have more confidence with Courtland Sutton, I want to be able to see that combination work before I go on ahead and start him above any of the other wide receivers I've mentioned. I think even though he's a very capable wide receiver, a deep ball passing threat, a guy that can catch for over 100 yards very easily, a touchdown very sneakily, he is a very good wide receiver. That should not be understated. Though he sits at 26, you have to understand the depth of the wide receiver position. 26 is a very high number when there's hundreds of wide receivers playing every single week. So again, I think Courtland Sutton is going to be perfectly fine. I'm just not convinced that he'll be able to automatically just out the gates be an unstoppable force that we want him to be. So I just take my hesitancy and put him at number 26. Moving on. Number 27 is Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has that questionable tag because as of prior to recording this video, I haven't heard anything about him. I know that he's missed a lot of practices over the last couple of weeks, and he's been dealing with an injury. On top of that, he was dealing with an injury last season. The plantar fasciitis that he dealt with last year, that has been a problem. That's probably what's affecting him even now. There's a potential that that's, I guess healed up over the offseason through therapy and stuff. But as of right now, on top of the fact that he's been injured over the last couple of weeks, he gets to play against Jalen Ramsey. And like I've mentioned prior in the offseason, anytime Amari Cooper faces against incredible number one coverage, he struggles heavily. Whether it was Ramsey last season or Darius Slay last season or Stephon Gilmore, he disappears in these games. And that's why I have Michael Gallup so high, because I think there's a potential that Amari Cooper could disappear. If he's healthy and he's ready to go, he moves up this list. Do not freak out. He moves up the list. Again, the updated rankings will show up on Sunday morning when we live stream. So don't worry. Just keep in mind, it's a little sketchy. Talking about another sketchy injured wide receiver, as of this moment in time, Brian Flores, the head coach of the Dolphins, has not said or committed to anything being the issue. Oh, we're keeping tabs on it, but we can't 100% say if he's going to play. Then I can't 100% say that he's going to be in my lineup this week, Brian Flores. Sorry, but DeVante Parker is already disappointing me to an extent, because if he's not healthy and ready to go in week 1, that is a scary sight to see. I don't want to have to be juggling and wondering if he's going to be productive, especially when he gets to go against Stephon Gilmore, the reigning defensive player of the year. I understand in week 17, he had 8 catches for 135 yards against that secondary. But then again, we just got to be careful, because there were games in the past where earlier in the season, DeVante Parker caught 0 passes against the New England Patriots. It's always a possibility. He could disappear. He could be healthy. He could pop off. I'm afraid of that in between and where it could potentially lie. So we'll see. Moving on to our number 29 on hand, we have ourselves T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton, again, should be perfectly fine. I think that the Indianapolis Colts offense is going to be so heavy on just pound the rock, run the ball against the Jacksonville Jaguars, front seven, that T.Y. Hilton might get ignored here and there. But I expect him to catch the ball 6+ times, get himself, potentially 60, 70 yards from Phillip Rivers, get himself, at least acclimated a little bit within the offense, and, be a perfect start as a wide receiver 3. Again, T.Y. Hilton always has the upside of a deep ball turning into a touchdown. He will always have that possibility. But again, we're just going to have to wait and see what he's capable of. Prior to getting injured last year, T.Y. Hilton was averaging fantasy points that a lot of people didn't expect. If I'm not mistaken, it was about 13 fantasy points per game prior to his injury last year. With Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, you improved that with Phillip Rivers this year. I see T.Y. Hilton being potentially another one of these great wide receivers that you got pretty cheap in the draft and can produce on a weekly basis. Moving on. Deebo Samuel, another one of these questionable wide receivers. Is he going to be healthy? Is he ready to play this week? I don't know. Prior to right now, I haven't really heard any other reports. I'm expecting him to be taken off of this questionable tag, potentially practice in full prior to Saturday, and give me a little bit more confidence. Again, a lot of the wide receivers for the San Francisco 49ers offense have been injured. Outside of, Deebo Samuel, Kendrick Bourne's the healthiest wide receiver there. So if Deebo Samuel's healthy, I'm starting him. I'm firing him up, because, again, the last time they played against the Arizona Cardinals, he just went off. 8 catches, 137 yards. Jimmy Garoppolo needs a wide receiver to throw the ball to, and that would be Deebo Samuel if, in fact, he's healthy and ready to go. Moving on. 31 is Julian Edelman. Even though he doesn't have Brady under center, he will have Cam Newton. I think Cam Newton's going to have to look for him as much as possible to get himself, pretty comfortable within said offense. Again, Cam Newton hasn't played a game since early 2019, and even then he wasn't fully healthy. So he hasn't been really fully healthy for almost 2 years. Hopefully, if and when they're ready to go this upcoming week against Miami's defense, I think Julian Edelman's a perfect start against this defense. A safe play in a PPR, half PPR setting in which he can catch the ball upwards of 6-7 times, get his yards after the catch going, even be a red zone threat as he's been in the past, and be perfectly fine as my number 31 wide receiver. Moving on. Jarvis Juice Landry. Jarvis Landry, even though Odell Beckham Jr. is probably going to pull majority of the attention, he always sits kind of hiding and has pretty good games against the Ravens. Last season, the first game against the Ravens, 8 catches for 167. The second game, 7 catches for 74. He's always been good against his defense because they don't really pay attention to the slot receiver too much. They just let him do what he wants, and he tortures them as such. So I expect him to do pretty well this upcoming week in this very competitive matchup. Jarvis Landry is my number 32. Number 33, Tyler Boyd. Now Tyler Boyd's going to sit in the slot. He'll probably have Desmond King on him, which is one of the best slot corners in the National Football League, which is a little concerning. But I think that the LA Chargers defense is not a defense to just kind of throw away. They're going to push Joe Burrow to the limit, and I think it's going to be pretty tough for Joe Burrow to produce. And that's why I've also put A.J. Green as my number 34 wide receiver, because I don't know what to do with these guys. I don't know if they're going to have a pop-off game. I'm hoping that Joe Burrow shows up and in his first game of his NFL career is at a different level. And it looks like he's an NFL caliber quarterback and able to feed the ball and dominate a secondary with Casey Hayward. And again, like I've mentioned, Desmond King, who are going to cover these top 2 targets for the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm a little worried there. I think that the pass rush could get to him if, in fact, his offensive line falls apart. That could, force a little bit of trouble for Joe Burrow. But again, I think both these guys have the upside of being top 36, even better wide receivers this upcoming week. But I'm just worried about the potential matchup on hand. Moving on to our last wide receivers on hand, we have ourselves number 35, DeSean Jackson. Playing against the Washington football team is not a difficult matchup at all, in my opinion. And from what we've seen from DeSean Jackson, even last year, it was a piece of cake for him prior to getting injured. I mean, in the matchup that he had against them, he went for 8 catches, 154 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. I think he is a breakout player. I think he's a potential hidden gem this week, and that's why I have him at number 35, because he's the number 1 wide receiver of this offense with Jalen Reagor hurt, Alshon Jeffrey on the pup. Who else are they going to throw the ball to besides DeSean Jackson, Ertz, and Miles Sanders, and maybe a little bit of Dallas Goedert? I think DeSean Jackson is a very high upside play. And even at 35, I think that might be a little low, but I give everybody else the benefit of the doubt because they have been productive over the last year. I haven't seen DeSean Jackson play since last year, week 1 against the Washington football team. So putting it out there. Moving on, our last wide receiver on hand, number 36, Marquise Brown, another one of these high upside players. What do we do with a high upside player that has the potential of disappearing and scoring 1 point because he didn't catch more than 1 pass in a singular week? Well, we put him at number 36 because, again, he's going to have to prove to us of what he's capable of. Week 1 of last year against Miami, had an incredible game, 2 touchdowns, 140 plus receiving yards. That's fine. But against the Cleveland Browns has not been successful in the past. So if in fact this Ravens team just wants to pound the rock and feed the ball to Mark Andrews, then Marquise Brown is going to disappear. But if in fact we get ourselves a couple sparks here and there, a pretty good game, I won't be surprised because he has that volatility factor that Tyreek Hill has. He just doesn't have the consistency even when he's having a poor game to at least middle out at 10 points. That's what scares me. And that's what kind of leaves him at number 36. Other wide receivers I had not mentioned today that I think are capable of easily being in the top 36, which we'll talk about if in fact they get there by Sunday in my adjusted rankings. Marvin Jones has had good games against the Chicago Bears. Anthony Miller, that matchup could be pretty exciting. Jamison Crowder, he's still questionable. We'll see where he ends up. But Emmanuel Sanders, Sterling Shepard, Henry Ruggs, I think these are players that should not be ignored, but they just couldn't make the list. It's a pretty compact list, but again, it's short for the wide receiver position considering how much talent and depth there is go this upcoming season. But regardless, thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate the continued support. Let's try to get to 20K subscribers, guys. That'd be absolutely incredible. Thank you everybody. I appreciate it. Go down below in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think. Again, I do appreciate your guys' continued support. Smash that like button. If you want updated flex rankings on a daily basis, all that kind of stuff, patreon.com/Andrew Kiorkof, private Discord server, ask me unlimited questions, all of that down there. You can check out the link down below and watch the video. Thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, which will be tomorrow, talking about quarterbacks and tight ends, I'll see you guys. Peace.